Welcome to Organian's Puzzle Box. In this comprehensive tutorial, we'll explore mesh painting in Unreal Engine 5.5 and 5.6, a powerful feature that lets you stack and paint multiple texture layers onto any mesh. Now a quick heads up, this is UV sensitive, so make sure your mesh has clean UVs. This workflow works great on terrain, walls, doors, and architectural surfaces in general. This tutorial has two parts, the basic mesh painting setup first, then advanced techniques with realistic blending and displacement mapping. Everything is based on this layer diagram that you're seeing on the screen. Tutorial files are free on my Patreon, including pre-made materials and textures. And for the price of a coffee, you get access to all of my projects there if you'd like. And if that's not enough to convince you, like, comment, and subscribe for a chance to win a free project of your choice from my portfolio. I'll randomly select a winner in a week and announce it in a short video. Now, like I've said, this video is divided in two parts, the simpler approach of setting this up, and then a more complex version. So if you want to have a look at the long form video, that's fine. If not, just watch the short point of it. Okay, so here we are in Unreal Engine 5.6, and we have the plane set up with the material that we needed for mesh painting. But we are going to delete all of this and start from scratch so I can show you the process. The first thing you want to do after deleting this plane is just making sure that obviously in the plugin folder you have the plugin called Mesh Paint enabled. So if this is not enabled, just do that and restart the engine. But before you do that, also before you restart the engine basically, and after enabling this plugin, you may not want to do that just yet because you also need to go into your project settings and type in virtual texture and then enable virtual texture support in here. So once you do that, restart the engine and then resume. Once you've done all of this and you're back into the engine, you'll notice that you now have a new option in here called Mesh Paint. And this is what we're going to use later on when we are trying to add the new layers. Now we want to add the plane back in, so I'm going to go over here, go to Basic Shapes and drag in a plane. Now this is in our world right now, but it is using the default Unreal Engine plane mesh, which we don't really want to edit, we want to make a new one. So we can actually right click it over here and click copy, then go into our content browser and press Ctrl V to paste. And this is the new plane that we are going to work with. And we're also going to press this arrow here to replace the current plane in the level with the one we just created, or you can just drag and drop it into that slot. Now I'm going to make sure that our plane is centered into the world, and I'm pressing F to go over it. We're not going to change anything about the scale as of yet, but we will do in a bit, and I'll show you why. Now that we have this set up, we need to replace this basic shape material with a new material that reacts to mesh painting. So, just by the way, just to show you, if we actually press Alt and 2 on the, sorry, this doesn't seem to work. Oh yeah, there we go. Alt and 2 on the keyboard to see the wireframe. The plane obviously only has 2 faces and only 4 vertices. And this is important because if you are doing vertex color painting, this plane would basically be impossible for you to do that because of the low resolution from these vertices. You would need a lot of vertices here to properly paint, you know, in this particular scenario. Right, so now we're going to go back into our content browser and create a new material. I'm going to call this m_mesh paint, and then I'm going to open it so we can start editing it. Now over in here, it's obviously a very basic material, so we need to start the setup. The first thing we want to do is we want to showcase how mesh painting actually works. So if we right click and type in mesh paint, we will have some new nodes that have been added because of the plugin that we have enabled. And we will need a mesh paint texture object, and we are also going to need a mesh paint texture replace. With these two nodes, we are going to make our setup. Now, another thing we want to do is we want to add a new lerp node right here. Okay, and if you consider these lerp nodes as you know, 0 and 1, and let's just say we're using 2 colors very quickly here, and this color is going to be something like a, you know, indigo, whatever you want to make it out, and then this one is going to be maybe like a red or something, right? And if we plug these like that, we then want to blend in between these two using this alpha. So this is where mesh painting comes into play, right? So we're going to drag out of here a texture sample. This is going to be where the virtual texture support is going to write the new information that we're doing for mesh painting. This is going to then connect into the mesh paint texture. And then where it says here default, you want to plug in a value of 0 like that in order for this to work. And this can then connect to the alpha. But if you do it like that, then you're basically using all the channels or the RGB channels for this. So we can actually add a component mask. And this one, we're going to paint in the red channel and we're going to put this into the alpha. And now we can plug this over into the base color and press apply. Now, if we go back into our, here in our plane, and obviously we need to assign this material, then this is what we're going to see. Like basically nothing's really changed. But if we switch over to mesh painting, then we will be able to see the effects. So we go to mesh painting, then with the plane selected, we will click the texture color and then press add. Now in here, we want to press paint. And now we have the red, green, blue, and alpha to paint with. So if we have a red active and we start painting, you'll notice that we are now adding the coloring of from that alpha. So we're adding the orange in, and obviously wherever there's no orange, then we'll get that indigo. Now to make those colors a bit more, popping up a little bit more, we are going to make this into an actual blue. So it's actually looking a lot more, different, so we can properly see what's going on. And now I think you can clearly see. But the resolution of our painting is very low, so we need to actually rectify this. In order to do it, with the plane selected, we can scroll down, and you'll notice that we now have this mesh painting, category in here. And you can see that the texture that is generated is this one. It's a virtual texture as well. And we can override the mesh paint texture resolution. So using a 256 value will definitely help. Now that we've done that, any new painting is still not using the new resolution. And in order for us to fix this onto the mesh paint mode, we do have this button called fix. And now you can see that it's greatly improved our resolution for painting, which is quite useful. Now, left clicking obviously paints, but shift left clicking deletes the layer that we've just created. And if you want to see what the red channel has been doing onto this texture, you can always switch the color view mode to RGB channels, or you can obviously just see the red channel and the green or whatever, but obviously we only painted in the red channel. So that's the basic setup so far. But for all intended purposes, the tutorial, the first part of the tutorial is pretty much done. All you have to really do now is basically replace these two colors with the textures that you'd like, and you can do this for any slot in here, and that will be it. But if you want to follow along for the more complex blend, then I would definitely greatly emphasize that you do to learn more. Now, I would strongly recommend that you watch my nanite tessellation displacement video, if you'd like, after this, to further understand how displacement works for landscapes and meshes in general. This will teach you quite a lot. So as I said, I strongly recommend that you watch this after you see this tutorial. Now, before we continue, we will need some really nice high quality textures in order to make this work. So I'm actually using Bridge, and in order for you to get access to it, you just go to your content folder, go to add, and then select add Quixel content, and it should open Bridge and you can sign in. Now, obviously, if you don't have Bridge or any assets on Bridge, then just go and get some textures. I will obviously have them in the free tutorial download, so you have textures there to work with. But either way, if I go on Bridge, I have these two textures that I'm using. This one here, curated stone facade, and then this cracked mud. Now, if we click this texture, for example, I have actually added it to the project at a high quality, which is 4K. I didn't use highest quality, I used high quality and then added to my project. The reason why it's important that we use Quixel Bridge is because the way how the textures will come in. So if you actually go into the content folder and go into the Megascan folder, you will notice that the way these textures come in is a diffuse, normal, and an ORD, which stands for occlusion, roughness, and displacement. If you get them from Fab, they won't come this way. So that's why I recommend that you watch my other tutorial about the texture graph in order to understand how to put together your own ORD textures in case you got your textures from Fab or somewhere else. The important bit here is that the ORD texture actually comes with the displacement map, which is on the B channel, and then, as I said, a roughness map on the green channel, and then an occlusion map on the red channel. And that's why this makes these textures very valuable. Right, so now I have those textures that I told you about, right? And this is what, these are the textures that I've got, this one and this one. We can now go over into our material here and start creating the pipeline for our work. So the first thing we want to do is we want to bring in the concrete texture, which is this, as I said, this stained concrete texture. I'm going to drag in the texture. Actually, it's not that one. Sorry, I have the wrong one. I'm going to go back into surfaces. I'm going to go for the curated stone. So this is the texture sample for the base color. Then we're going to do the normal and the ORD. Now, with these in here, we obviously want to be able to change their tiling. So we are actually going to add a texture coordinate right over here. So I'm just going to right click and search for texture. Oh, sorry, let me just do texture coordinate like that. And then we're going to connect this to a multiply node. This is not the right node. Sorry, just a multiply node like that. And then we want to add the scalar parameter in here, which we are going to call UV tile, right? And we're going to set this to a tile of 1 by default, and then we can plug that into the multiply node, and then this all goes into the UVs like so. Okay, and this controls all of our UVs for these textures, which is great, right? This is what we want to do. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to extract the base color in a clean way. So what I mean by this is, from the RGB, we're going to type in a named reroute like that, and we are going to call it concrete, there we go, base, right? And this is going to be our base color for the concrete. If you want, obviously you can name it to base color or whatever you want. And then we're going to do the same thing for the normal and the ORD very quickly. Okay, with this done, we now want to basically be able to control our displacement with far more options, because displacement is very important to get it right and to blend correctly. So because we have here the name reroute, I'm going to unplug it and put it somewhere around here. From the blue channel over here, I'm going to drag out and I'm going to add a add node like that. And this is going to then connect to a 1 minus. So we're going to drag out and type in 1 minus like that, so we're inverting it. And then this, we're going to need a lerp in here, so I'm going to connect that to the A slot there, and then this add node will connect to the B slot like that. And this lerp, if we add another add node in here like so, and then we want to saturate the result of all of this like that, and the saturation will go into an S curve node, which will allow us to further refine our displacement, and this will connect into the concrete displacement like that. Now, for this add node in here, we want to add a scalar parameter. This is going to be our displacement center. So this is going to be the center point for our displacement, which will be by default set to 0. Then we're going to have a displacement intensity. So this is going to control our intensity of the displacement with a default value of, let's say, something like a 1. Okay, and then this add node over here is going to be our displacement offset. So I'm going to copy this scalar, put it over here, connect it, and I'm going to rename this to offset, like I've said. And this is going to be by a default value of 0.5. And then the S curve over here, we're going to need to connect something to the power. So again, I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to call this displacement S curve, which will allow us to have a nice curve onto our displacement, and this is going to have a value of 1. And this is going to be our setup for the actual displacement done. Now, with this in particular, we now have the basically the concrete. Okay, so this is the concrete base, like I've said. And then we want to have the mud one. So we effectively will do exactly this entire setup, but for mud. So I'm going to skip that step because I will leave you to do it. It's fine. Now we have our base color for the concrete and the mud and the normal and everything else that we needed. It's time now to blend based on height information between the two. So what we're going to search for is a height lerp with 2 height maps. That's what we're going to use over here. Okay, and because we've created named reroutes for everything, here's a very cool thing. We can actually type in displacement to search for concrete displacement, and we can obviously bring in our mud displacement as well. And these two are very important because onto the first height texture, we're going to put the concrete, and then the second one, we're going to put our mud displacement. Now, for the transition phase and contrast, we need 2 scalar parameters. So I'm going to type this as going to be the transition with a default value of 0.5, and this will connect over here. And then we have another scalar parameter for contrast, like I've said, and this is going to have a default value of 3, and we're going to connect it over to the contrast. Now, this is very important because now we can use this to blend for our diffuse. So if we put this up here like that, we can now get our concrete base color. So what we need to type in is concrete base color, connect that into the diffuse, like so, and then we can type in mud base color, and this can connect over into this second diffuse like that. Okay, so this is going to effectively blend what we need for our base color, and we need to do the same for our roughness and then our normal as well. Now, this particular node here where we've used for base color, we can get two results out of this. So the first one over here is going to be another name reroute called base color, right? And then we can say mud blend, right? So this means that we have the base color where we're blending between the mud and the concrete as a blend. And then we have this resulting height map, which we're going to do another name reroute over like that. And we are going to call this displacement mud blend. Okay, so this is really cool because we have two maps now that we can use straight away, but we need to do the same thing for roughness and for normal. Bear in mind, we don't need to do this displacement output anymore for the roughness and normal because we already have defined it over where we did the base color. So I'm going to speed up and do that now because obviously there's no point in me redoing this again. Just make sure that these two here, the concrete mud displacement and all that, these are connected into every other height map. So if we put this over here like that, you want the same nodes, right, to go into height 1 and height 2, and then these transition and contrast again need to connect into like that. The only thing that's different is what you're putting into the diffuse, and in this particular case it's going to be our concrete normal and mud, and then after that's going to be our roughness. Again, we're treating everything as a diffuse, but obviously it doesn't really matter, it will work regardless. So we now have all of our three blends that we needed. We have it for base color, displacement, for normal, for roughness. So everything is done for this, for the mud blend. So now what we want to do is do the mesh painting blending so we can start painting with all of that, right? So what we're going to do, where we have the component mask over here, we're going to actually duplicate this 2 times, okay, like that. And this component mask, the second one will be using just the green channel, while the third one will be using just the blue channel. So now we're using all 3 channels. They're all gonna be connected to the same texture, like so, which is quite neat, because this allows us now to paint with these 3 layers quite easily. We can obviously use the alpha channel as well if we need to, but let's just leave it like that. Okay, so we've got one lerp here, and what I want to do is I want to bring a second lerp and then a third lerp. So we have 3 lerps. This lerp, the first one, will actually connect between the concrete base color and mud base color. So what this means is if we type in here base color, we have concrete base color, and then we're going to type in mud, and we have the mud base color. So these two, okay, they will connect to the first lerp like so in A and B. But now we also want the concrete base color to connect into the next lerp, which is this one here. And into the B one, we want to get the mud blend. So we're going to get the mud blend base color, this one. This is going to go in the B. Now, for the B, for the second lerp, we're going to use the green channel to paint that in. Okay, so now this lerp that is fully connected can go into the A slot of the last lerp node, like that. This one will go into the base color, right? And we need to connect something into the B stuff over here. So what we're going to do there is we're going to put a concrete base color again. And sorry, I made a mistake here. This concrete base color should have not connected to this lerp onto the A slot. It should have been this lerp. So there you go. I hope that makes sense now. Okay. And yes, this concrete base color does need to connect to the B on the last lerp. And then for the alpha, we are going to use the as I said, the B channel there, like so. Now we're going to press apply, and our material just for base color is effectively done. So if we go back into our level in here, you'll notice that the paint has already taken place. So there's another thing that we want to do. Let's go to our you know, mesh paint, so we can actually, you know, remove everything. So with this mesh selected, we can go into paint like that, and this allows us to now paint the layers based on, you know, the red, the green, whatever we want to do. Green and blue, like for example, right now, you'll notice that blue is adding the concrete, and then green is again adding a concrete. But what does red do? You know, red effectively adds the mud in, just the mud, right? But there's going to be a blend in here, like the green, for example, that's going to do a blend between the green and the blue, okay? But there are some caveats, like it doesn't seem to be working well. So we need to set this up more, you know, better. So the first thing we want to do is we want to search for our material, and then we want to right click it and create a material instance. And this instance, we will drop this into the material slot of this plane. So I'm going to go over here and drop it in. And now we can actually open the material instance, okay? And we can start editing some of its options. So the first thing we want to, you know, obviously change in here is the actual tiling. So we got, I don't even know why I've got UV tile and UV tiling. I must have made a mistake somewhere. Oh yeah, I know where I've made a mistake, and I'll just rectify that straight away. So I made a mistake right about here because I should have connected the same thing to the mud texture. You see the same connector needs to go into all these UVs. So now that that's done, we can have a look again at the material instance, and now we can do UV tiling to set to 2. And also, if you notice, if we play around with this transition, we'll be able to see some different results right there. You can see how the mud is transitioning with the concrete, but unfortunately, we're not seeing any displacement or normal or roughness right now. So we need to rectify that and add those into our material. So if we go back into our material shader in here, we do now have to set up the same thing. So this for roughness, normal, and displacement. So I'm going to quickly do that, and it's going to be quite simple. Obviously, we're just copying the same nodes, so all of these alphas will be in the same way as they were in the base color. So we have to effectively mirror all of this, but now for roughness, normal, and displacement. So I'm going to do that, and then we can resume the tutorial. Okay, so now our setup is done for base color, roughness, and normal, but you'll notice that we actually can't use the displacement slot. And to do this, we're going to go over here and enable tessellation, which will then allow displacement to be used. So we can plug that in and press apply. Now we can go back into our shader in our viewport, but the displacement isn't actually working. So what's going on? Well, the problem is that we haven't actually set this plane up as a nanite mesh. So I'm going to double click it over here, and then over into the panel here where it says enable nanite support, I'm going to click that and press apply changes. This means that now the plane is a nanite mesh, and once it like completely, you know, does what it needs to do, then it will now have displacement. As you can see there, it's now doing it. Okay, now this displacement looks a bit, you know, it can look odd, it could be bad, worse, whatever, you know what I mean? It really depends on how it was set up, but this is how these meshes look like in terms of their displacement. So we now need to bring our material instance again. So we have it over here like that. And one thing that I want to do with the plane when it's selected, I want to set its scale to 10 and then 10 over here, and leave the scale here set to 1. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I want to give the geometry more space to breathe. Okay, so when we look at the displacement intensity here, we can actually type in a higher number, maybe something like a 5 or something like that. Okay, but we're not really getting the result that we want. So this is where the experimentation comes in. So you want to put the displacement curve to 1, for example, which will then allow for that mud to stick out a bit more. We also want to look at our displacement offset should be 0.5. Sorry, that's basically what it needs. Now again, I've got these displacement curves twice, and offset and center, and that's because I've copied some nodes over. So I'm going to go over here into mesh paint and just make sure that I'm using the same naming convention. So it should have been displacement center, and if it isn't, then I'm just going to drag this over like that into the mud, and then intensity like that. This is what's going to happen if you copy your nodes from somewhere else like I did and not using the same names. But now that should be fine. I'm going to press apply, and this is now using only the same nodes. And as you can see, the number of parameters has decreased as well, and our material should be a lot better now. So we can actually have a look at increasing the displacement intensity, and looking at the displacement offset is fine. We can have a look at reducing the displacement S-curve, like that. Move around the scene a little bit for those shadows to be fixed whenever you're changing displacement, in order to make sure that you fix that problem. Okay, now we obviously can play around with the UV tile more if we want. Maybe a 3 is the right one. Obviously, the tutorial that I told you about displacement covers more of this topic. Now we're going to be going back into our paint mode for texture color. So let's have a look at what the channels do. So the red channel will allow us to add mud, full-on mud, wherever there is no other channel overriding it. Like, for example, we can't paint any mud here because there is the other channel, I think perhaps the green channel, no, sorry, the blue channel is overriding this. So if we shift left click, we can actually delete the blue channel from here. But better yet, you may want to actually just clear everything. So just press the remove, and now you're back to the concrete base, which is without any mud. And then if we add again and start painting, and let's say we paint only with the red channel, this will bring on full mud, right? And then if we paint with the green channel, this will bring in the combination of mud and concrete blend. And this blend can be then controlled over by this transition right here. Okay, so if this transition is set to 0, for example, there is no mud. But if the transition starts going up, then the mud starts sticking out from those crevices, all the way to the point where it's completely overpowering the actual concrete, right? So I think a value of 0.6 is probably about right. Now, obviously, your contrast is going to play a big role here in terms of like getting a nicer transition or a more a fixed transition. So just really play around with the settings that you need in order to get this done properly. And then, as I said, if you want to overwrite what you've done here in terms of painting with the blend and just the mud itself, you can always go to the blue channel, which then will completely eradicate the blend and the mud, right? Or you can delete both the red channel and the blue. But if you want to see what you've done, you can always change the color view mode to RGB. So this shows you what you've painted. And then obviously you can also see every channel individually if you need to. Just bear in mind, depending on where you've placed your blends. So over here, like for example, the blue channel, this one will always overpower everything else because it's the last blend, the last lerp in the line, while the red channel is the least one, is the smallest one because it's the first one in the line, right? So that's how you need to look at it. It's the first lerp, which means that every other lerp will overwrite it if you know, obviously that just gives you the logic of it all. But that's basically it. That's how you do this particular setup and you get your mesh painting going on any surface that you like. Now, I hope you enjoyed this mesh painting tutorial. To support the channel, check out my Patreon or Fab store. And remember, for just the price of a coffee on Patreon, you get access to all my projects with full support and updates. Don't forget about the giveaway. Like, comment, and subscribe for a chance to win a project of your choice from my portfolio. And the winner is announced next week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Keep creating.